Question: why does God allow suffering? Well, before we tackle this question, it's one thing we need to say very clearly right at the outset, is this talking about suffering is a very sensitive topic. And the best we can do here is offer some form of explanation for suffering, but it doesn't alleviate the profound emotional cry for a solution, usually at a very personal and individual level. We must admit that reason and philosophical discussion and theory cannot fully answer the cries of the heart, cannot fully give an answer to somebody who has lost a dear one. So on the outset, we want to first admit that we are incapable of providing an individual solution. But that does not mean that we should not think about it or deeply think about it. All things considered, this presentation is trying to provide an understandable worldview to provide some form of intellectually satisfying and emotionally fulfilling response to the problem of why suffering is allowed. So it is really, if you like, we are looking at it from a general approach to why God allows suffering. So given that introduction, let's very briefly mention where, in effect, the start of suffering might be. Well, really, right from the very beginning, God has given humans the right to choose, the free will, basically, in order to fully experience the relational love and relationship between God. God has provided human beings with the right to choose to love Him, and by inference, the right to choose comes with the right not to choose to love Him. Unfortunately, our first humans have chosen to rebel against God, to reject His love and reject His ways, and humans choose to go their own way. And when they reject God and to choose their own way, you can work on this premise that whatever is good and is perfect comes from God. And when you reject that proposal, when you reject that offering, you reject whatever that is good and whatever that is perfect. You reject the chance to experience a life of joy, peace, gentleness, beauty, kindness, love, and all that is called good. And all this is dependent on the result of being in a relationship with goodness, in a relationship with God, and to live accordance to His ways. And when finite humans choose His own sovereignty in His own ways, if you like, which means He chooses to reject this relationship with God, humans have rejected a life and have chosen a life without all the goodness, without joy, without peace, without love, without goodness. So it's a life that's chosen opposite of God. The result is obviously a life of pain and a life of suffering. Well, let's use a very hypothetical example just to consolidate this thought. And it's not a real example, but I think it's one that might help us fully understand what we just talked about then. Imagine we have a family of fish. As a very intelligent being, this fish is given the intelligence, and this fish lives in water, breathing good oxygen from the water using their gills, if you like. And then one day, this head of the fish decided, we are sick and tired. We don't want to live in this water. We want to go and live on land. And being intelligent fish, they decide to invent things and do things that would allow their gills that are not designed to breathe out of water to breathe on land. So they moved from water to land. But with difficulty, they live on the land. They have to live with equipment, with inconvenience, with the fear of dying without oxygen, because if you don't have any equipment with you, you would die, and continuously living in of fear and inconvenience. And this intelligent fish on land with all the equipment would have offsprings, and they created generations and generations of fish that didn't look quite like the original fish, but had all the equipment attached to them so that they can struggle to live on land. They lived a living death and a living inconvenience, if you like. It's a tragedy. Question: is this tragedy a result of the creator of the fish, or is it because of the rebellion of the original fish? Well, the answer is quite obvious. This suffering and this tragedy is the fault of the first fish, or the original fish, that chose to live contrary to their design, outside the paradise of water. In short, they are not meant to live out of water. I know this is perhaps quite a very simple illustration, but it does remind us, it does help us understand what happened to us humans when we were supposed to be created to live in a perfect, holy, good, and enjoyable life. And because of this rebellion, because of the rejection of the good and enjoyable life, suffering is the result. Well, then, if you took this example and went back to the original question, which says that why does God allow suffering? Well, did he? Or you can say the Creator is faced with the consequences of the decision of rejection by the creation, the humans. But God knows this. He's not ignoring this suffering. He's actually actively and personally doing something about this suffering through his only Son. I mean, when humans rejected God's sovereignty and rejected God's grace and righteousness, not only humans suffer, God himself suffered. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 6, it says, "It broke his heart." That's why he has promised Abraham in Isaiah chapter 25, 7 to 8, God wanted to do something about it. Quote, "In that day he will remove the cloud of gloom, the shadow of death that hangs over the earth. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away all tears. He will remove forever all insults and mockery against his land and his people." Unquote. God suffered through the sacrifice of his Son. God wanted to do something about the suffering, and God will do something about the suffering. So in conclusion, human suffering is a direct consequence of humans rejecting the goodness, the joy, the peace, and the love in exchange for pain and suffering. But God was not going to let that be. He has a story, he has a plan to redeem humans from this condition. So we may need to readdress this question about why does God allow suffering. It is not about God allowing suffering, it's about God saying, I acknowledge there is suffering, I acknowledge that humans have rejected me, but yet I'm not going to give up on humans, yet I will do something about it. Given all this, we can understand that this will not be the answer that an individual would be looking for. An individual suffering from a very personal and deep pain, this is not going to give them the solution for it, and we recognize that. But we just hope that, knowing that God is aware of it, knowing that God is going to do something about it, knowing that in the end, when he has finished redeeming us, that we may one day see and feel and be in relation with the people we love. Until then, we simply need to trust God, to know that he knows about the suffering, and he needs to know that he is and he will do something about it. And given all this, the last nagging question might be, okay, I can understand that suffering is a natural consequence of the free will that humans have used, or used it in the wrong way, and innocent people suffer because of that. Then I can see the next question coming out, why hasn't God done something sooner? Not about why hasn't God done anything, but why wouldn't he do something sooner? If he is going to finally conquer suffering and death, why is it taking him so long? Well, this question will be answered in the next presentation.